and they released that guidance in early July of this year, July of 2018. As Debbie shared, California will be submitting a letter requesting an extension for both dates for personal care services. And Debbie shared with you that of course, we have to see kind of where the federal bill lands, but in the interests of whatever may proceed, we are going to submit our request anyway, so that could be either a start date if CMS approves it for personal care services of either 2020 or 2021. And we will also be requesting the extension for the January 2023 start date for EVV for home health services as well. So we're going to ask for that extension in our letter. Our letter will include an overview of all of our stakeholder planning and all of our implementation efforts to date. The letter is due to CMS from states by November 30th, 2018, and we will be submitting within that time frame. If CMS, for some reason, denies the good faith extension, they will allow states to have a conference call with them to get some additional information, and will allow states to resubmit that request for their consideration again. So that is the overview of the process that we're going to expect to take in requesting our extension for both of those EVV implementation dates. And that's all I have for that. And so I'll pass the baton to the other Sarah.
All right. So I'm Sarah number 2. So you're always number 1. So part of my job is to request the funding for this effort. As you know, in the law, they said that the federal government would pay for 90% of this. And so to get that funding, you have to submit a request to the federal government. We submitted the request to the federal government on July 2nd. They have a 60-day period to review that. So we hope to hear back in the September timeframe of whether or not we were approved for that funding. That's about all that I have to say about that.
So we just wanted to make sure that everybody was informed of kind of the different steps and the different pieces associated with this and what work we're doing around that. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of the different stakeholder activities that have been going on and that will be continuing to go on. Obviously, this is our 4th, as I said, large stakeholder meeting. As well, we have been doing monthly communications. If we don't have a full stakeholder meeting, we're doing that via email. It goes out to our full distribution list, which currently has about 600 folks on it that information is going out to, and I'm sure folks also share that beyond themselves. So we're trying to get as much information out as possible via email. One of the next things that we are going to be working on also, because of the feedback we've heard from all of you folks, is that while we try to do as much communications as we can, that there is, I'm sure, recipients and providers who may not be aware of EVV or what's happening with it. So we are developing a mailer that would provide information about what EVV is, where information can be found about it, and how people can participate in these kinds of discussions and have input into the process. And we will do a direct mailing out to all of our recipients, and then we'll do timesheet stuffers to all of our providers so that everyone will have an opportunity to know about EVV and where they can get information about it. So we will be working on that here in the next month or two to get that out. So that's some of our bigger stuff going on as far as stakeholder communications. We will continue to have these meetings as we have been, as well as continuing the email activity. But the other thing that we are going to be doing, because as I was just talking about a couple of minutes ago, while we're hopeful that potentially we can have a delay here, it's still important for us to be able to continue these conversations, because ultimately we still have to implement electronic visit verification or receive penalties. And so we are going to continue that process. And what the delay does is give us time to do that in a very stakeholder-driven and thoughtful approach, which is what we want. What I want to talk about a little bit today before we open this up for comments from you all is to talk about our approach to development. Okay, so in our previous stakeholder meetings, we have kind of talked about how we want to do EVV in this state. And we came to decisions with you all about utilizing our current vendors, expanding on systems that we already have in place, and doing things in as simple a way as possible. So we have kind of two paths. We have the path of doing things online, expanding on our current electronic timesheets that we implemented last year, and adding the new elements of a start time and an end time and a location. And for those of you that this may be your first meeting or you haven't heard me talk about this before, start time would be the first time a service is provided of IHSS or WPCS in the day, and the end time is the last time a service is provided in the day. And then as today, the total number of hours would be entered. So someone could potentially have a start time of 9 in the morning, an end time at 9 at night, and work a total of 5 hours during that period of time. We're trying to stay away from the cumbersome process of checking in and out as someone provides services periodically throughout the day. And then as far as location, we landed on trying to simplify that as much as possible as well, having it be an indicator of either home, community, or both as to where the service was provided. So that information would simply be added into the portal that someone goes into to complete their electronic timesheets. They would just enter that additional information as well. For the recipient, they would be approving as they do today at the end of the pay period, and they would go in and view that information and then give their approval at the end of each of the pay periods. Okay, so that was one piece. And the other was we want to do a telephonic system for those individuals that don't feel comfortable or don't have access to any kind of online options, is to be able to do this via the telephone. It would be collecting of the same information that I just spoke about, but by entering it using a telephone system. Okay, just a regular telephone, either a cell phone or a landline that someone would call in and enter that information. Okay, so those are the two paths that we're talking about, and we would be looking at beginning development, because development, it's very critical to us that we do this in conjunction with getting ongoing feedback as we develop from our recipients and our providers and all of our stakeholders. We are looking at a similar approach to what we did when we actually implemented the electronic timesheets, because we found that to be very successful. We got direct input from our recipients and providers about electronic timesheets as we built it. Okay, and we want that same thing, as well as from our stakeholders. So because we are doing this with our current system vendors, we have initiated talking to them about what our discussions with you all have been so far, and those things that I was just referring to about how we want this to work. And what they will do is they will be building a prototype. Okay, they will build a prototype for us of what we're describing to them. After they do that, which will take them a couple of months, then we're looking at in October, November of this year, starting to bring that out to going to different parts of the state, different regions, and doing focus groups, doing groups with our recipients and providers for them to actually look at that tool, see how it works, and give us feedback. We will also do some demos for our stakeholder groups so they can see it and see what it looks like and give us feedback, because we want all of you to be a part of building what this is going to look like. And then once we get that feedback, our vendors will take that feedback and make adjustments to that prototype. They'll spend another couple of months doing that. And then we're going to do the same process again in the spring, where we bring it back out to focus groups in the regions throughout the state, ask for feedback, have people look at it, have people give us ideas about what's working or what's not working or what we need to make sure we do to make it be the best it can be. And then the vendor again will take that information and re-update that prototype to integrate that feedback. So we're looking at least at a year-long process that involves all recipients and providers and stakeholder feedback to ensure that we're going the right direction and we're doing things, building this in a way that's going to make sense for folks. And we'll do that. That discussion, that description was kind of how the online system will work. Also, over this same period of time, this next year, for the telephonic system, it will be more of a development of the scripts that the person would hear on the phone. And so we will be doing a similar thing of drafting scripts and then bringing those out to the recipient and provider focus groups and stakeholder groups to get feedback on the scripts and if they make sense and if they work for people in being able to enter information through a telephonic system to comply with EVV. So you can see that it's important that while we're hoping for delay, that we still want to use our time so that we're ensuring that we're getting the feedback of all of the people that are going to have to use the system and support folks using the system, and that we come up with something that will work as best as we can for implementing this in California. So that's kind of the approach to that. That gets you through kind of the development. Also, during this next year, we will be having stakeholder discussions around what implementation is going to look like, okay? And I don't have a lot of detail in implementation because that's something we'll work on this next year and what that's going to look like. But again, what we are thinking of as our approach is very similar to what we did with electronic timesheets, where we piloted something, we got feedback from the pilot. Again, you adjust your prototype and based on feedback from the pilot. And then we do a very slow implementation process with small groups at a time so that we can ensure that as the system comes up in each part of the state, that there's enough support for individuals who are starting to use it, that there's enough people on a help desk, that there's enough training coming out, that there is enough support for providers and recipients who will utilize the system to feel comfortable in being able to do it. But again, that will be something that we're working on this year, is how to approach that, what it should look like, what the schedule is going to be, how long it will take to do the whole thing, what training materials do we need. When we did electronic timesheets, we came out and did some in-person training for folks. We put a lot of stuff on our website so people could always go back onto the website and see webcasts that describe for them each piece of electronic timesheets. We did webinars where people could call in like they do to this call and receive information. We did mailings of information. So a part of what would be happening over this next year is getting feedback about what are all of the different things that we need to know to do to ensure that people receive all of the training and the support and information they need about how to utilize the EVV system. So you can see that all of this takes time, right? And which is why we don't want to just stop, even though there may be a delay, or if there is a delay determined, we want to continue to engage because we want to make sure that we do EVV in a way that is going to support everyone in the state that will be required to use this kind of system and ensure that they have a tool that will be workable and that they will have the support they need in training and directions. So that's kind of our thoughts for this next period of time, the development process, how we'll start working on the implementation strategy when we get to that point. And I'm going to stop talking now and give you all an opportunity to make any comments. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to ask a question, please press star, then 1 on your phone keypad. You will hear a tone indicating that you've been placed in queue. You may remove yourself from queue at any time by pressing the pound key. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please press star 1 at this time.
And before we, just for a second, before we go to questions on the phone, I think I'm going to start in the room, and I am going to ask Carol to share. We do have a kind of little development timeline, high-level timeline of what I just described, so people can kind of see it visually as well. She'll email it out to folks on the email distribution list, as well as post it in the room on the screen. And I'm going to take a few questions in the room first, and then we'll go to the phones. Marty?
First of all, thank you for doing this. Marty Emoto, California Disability Senior Community Action Network. I appreciate the update. So my question actually is, there's 2 questions. One is, are we certain that and maybe it's not important to answer the question now about the further delay, because I made that assumption too, that if they delay it 1 year, then the guidance that was issued, and I thought it was in May actually, would potentially delay it, potentially provide states with the option of delaying it 1 year longer, even though.
And that's correct. So that if the bill is signed, then it would delay the implementation date to 2020 and then move ahead the good faith effort date another year as well. So we still want to move forward with our good faith effort work because we don't know if the bill will be signed for sure or not. But, and even if it's signed, we would probably be doing a good faith effort just for the next year.
We would all encourage that.
Exactly.
The second is you're talking about the focus groups and the existing vendors working on one piece of it. That applies to the waiver personnel care services and IHSS. But the other big piece is the other home care services that are required to comply. And that includes also the regional center funded services, and Brian Winfield knew that was going to point to.
And you are exactly right. And you know what? I skipped it on my agenda, but we have initiated some conversations about the agency model, and Sarah's going to share with you where we're at with that and what the stakeholder process we're going to be initiating is.
So tied to that also is will agencies get some of the implementation funding, because the agency's providers are stretched thin in terms of resources. So thank you. And also just on outreach, I think and assume, because of the other outreach effort that you've done in the electronic timesheet, which was really good, is that of course you'll be reaching out to the different communities of color and all the language issues and all that. Thank you.
And
Hi, Marty. It's Sarah. I was going to answer your question. So for the agency model, we would be submitting a separate document, a planning APD to CMS. And so I won't be able to answer your question now, but I do think over the stakeholder process I'm going to describe that I'll be able to share more information.
And I think that they're looking at starting stakeholder engagement for agency model end of August, beginning of September.
Actually, end of September, beginning of October. Sorry, a little bit forward. And if you'd like, Debbie, do you want me to give the update on the stakeholder process? So as Debbie shared, we know that the self-directed and agency model work together, but we also know that dedicated time to discuss EVV from the view of agency model is needed for both personal care services and home health services. And an agency model is just exactly what it sounds like. It's personal care services or home health services that are provided to recipients through an agency. And that agency, of course, finds the providers and employs them to serve recipients or participants needing personal care services or home health services. We know there are agencies providing waiver personal care services through our home and community-based alternatives waiver, as well as our in-home operations waiver. And we also know, as Marty mentioned, that there are personal care services that are being provided under waivers that are overseen by other sister agencies, such as the Department of Developmental Services, California Department of Aging, and then Department of Public Health. And that would include the DD waiver, multi-purpose senior services program, and our AIDS HIV waiver services, as well as home health services provided under Medi-Cal in general. So we're looking to begin, as I shared, our stakeholder conversations for the agency model in the end of September or early October or the fall. And while we know, again, the models may be connected, we just want to be sure we spend time discussing the needs of agencies providing personal care services and home health services, as well as recipients under a dedicated conversation. And so we want to let you know that there'll be more information to come, but that is our approach.
Just the other question, and thank you for that, was will those agencies be
Oh,
I'm sorry. Oh, they're recording it. I should start singing. Will those agencies be given resources like the state is getting resources to help implement this? And you're shaking your head.
I'm going to say that I'm going to provide some updates on that during the stakeholder process. I don't have that information as of now.
Okay.
To answer your question.
Okay.
So more to come.
So we could be hopeful. Thank you.
Just as kind of an aside, Carol worked diligently, and we finally do have the recordings of the previous stakeholder meetings posted on our website, and then this one is as well being recorded today, because that was a desire for a while to get that posted so people could hear it if they weren't able to attend.
Hi, this is Marissa Shaw. I have a couple questions. The first is that do you have an idea of what focus groups might look like? The reason why I'm asking is because I'm interested potentially. All my attendants, their primary language is not English; it's Spanish. However, I obviously speak English, and that's my primary language. So I bring that up because there's two languages being spoken in where my services are provided. And I consider myself in the know, but I didn't realize that to get on the electronic timesheet system, you don't go through the public authority, you go through a link, and I had no idea. So if I don't know, and I'm kind of in the know, like I could imagine that there's a lot of people who don't know, A, and B, they'll get lost within this whole EVV new program development, and that makes me a little nervous. And I hate to say this, but my attendants get the flyers in the envelopes, and they rarely read them until they say, "Oh, I got something in the mail," and then I'm like, "What'd you get in the mail?" And it becomes an interesting conversation, and something winds up getting recycled until I tell them, let me read it. So, and like I said, I consider myself in the know, but I'm just saying that that's what happens in my household. So I would encourage CDSS to even go as far as to creating a YouTube video, just an idea. And I also encourage to keep to keep paper timesheets, because I understand there's a possibility to eliminate them, but I strongly would urge against that because I'm still on paper, and I know there's going to be a lot of people who will get stuck in the system if you don't keep paper, at least to keep it around to prevent problems and to possibly fix them. And the other comment I have is for those that are interested in focus groups, if not that I don't have faith in my state, but if something is really wrong in the focus group and we're in it for IHSS or so forth, I don't want to have a problem with my IHSS hours if there's some debacle in a focus group, and I'm sure other people would agree. So how would the state prevent that sort of issue if a person decided to go into a focus group? And I'm sorry, I have a third one because you started it. I consider myself a dual. I receive regional center services, and I'm self-vendorized. So I'm glad there's all this conversation about agency. I hear nothing in regards to those that are self-vendorized and how that'll work. I'm going to go a little further. I'm a little nervous because there's all this conversation about agency, and I don't hear any kind of avenue for those that are self-vendorized. And I don't, for myself anyway, I don't want to get stuck in some agency model and be told that I have to go to an agency, which I've never done before, and I don't plan to, no offense. And I want to make sure that those of us that are self-vendorized across the state, because I know that regional center is rolling out some new programs come January 2019. Yeah, they are. And they plan to create more services and programs around SLS, supported living services, and so so that's part of it. So I really want to hear some development around those of us who are self-vendorized, and I don't know. You have to decide what to do, but I think those might be separate conversations away from separate from the agencies. I have another comment, and then I'll shut up. There are those of us in the room and on the phone call who are a part of the Nickel National Centers for Independent Living Council and their focus group and their subcommittee. So, and I'm one of the people on their focus group, and so so we supported, Nickel supported, and our group supported the passage of the Guthrie bill that you were talking about, and our strategy as a group in general, especially those from us in California, is to help move EVV out, like permanently. But so we want to work with the state with the extension if need be, and also with developments on the federal level as they come down.
Thank you, Marissa. And I'm going to try and remember the different points that you had. The first one I think is important, which is that oftentimes people don't read the things that get sent to them. And I think that's just going to be a reality that we need to be aware of. And one of the things that we try and do is look at different ways to reach out to people and to do multiple kind of outreach activities. So for like electronic timesheets, we're in the process of doing other mailers for people who threw the first one away. And we also are developing flyers that social workers can take with them when they do assessments and directly hand to their recipients, and if their providers are there with them, to their providers. And we're also talking to counties when they get phone calls, which they do often from their providers, to talk to them about the option for electronic timesheets. And there's a lot of information about electronic timesheets on our website, and you mentioned YouTube, and we do have our webcasts are through YouTube videos. So there's a variety of ways, and we need to continue that and do as much outreach as possible. I totally agree with everything that you said related to that, and we will continue to work on that, especially because if folks are utilizing electronic timesheets, the changeover to EVV would be pretty simple. It would be the same tool that they were already using with additional information. Not that it doesn't require additional effort, but that at least it would be something very familiar to folks, which was the whole reason and all the input we got from all of you around trying to do things in the easiest, simplest way that we could. And that's really been our mantra in trying to approach this. The self-vendorized is not a program that I'm overly familiar with, and I know I've been connecting you with Jim Knight over at DDS to have conversations, because I know that that's something that they will be having to look at and ensure that it's accounted for as a part of this process. So keep bringing it up, and we'll make sure it gets looked at and addressed. The focus groups? Okay. So what that really is similar to what we did with ETS, where we go out to the different regions and we usually work with the counties in those surrounding areas about identifying recipients, and with the labor organizations about identifying providers that would be interested in participating in looking at the tool and giving feedback. We're not dependent on the focus groups. It's just another avenue to make sure that we are considering everything that we need to when we're looking at development of the tool, and that we haven't forgotten something. Yeah.
I mean, just in my particular, and I'm bringing up my situation because that's all I can really talk about. I have 4 different providers, and so 2 of them are slightly computer literate, and 2 of them are completely like not internet based computer literate folks. So currently only one is interested in the electronic timesheet system, but I would assume if EVV comes about, then I need to know about the telephonic system, right, because I have to do something for my folks that are not computer literate. So
and you each of your individual relationships with each provider can be done differently. So one provider may choose to use the online method, and you can let them do it that way, and another one can use telephone. So they don't all have to use the same one, just because they all work for you.
Okay.
I'm going to take one more question in the room, and then I'm going to let some folks on the phone ask too.
Connie Barker, home care provider in Marin County and a member of SEIU 2015. Following up on what Marissa had to say about the telephonic system, I know a lot of people who, for very many reasons, can't deal with computers, or some people, have electrical sensitivity issues, and they can't go near any of that. So when it comes to the telephone option, I mean, I see a timeline here for the EVV web portal prototype and all this, but I don't see anything on your timeline about developing the phone model too. I mean, it's the round one for the telephonic system
It's
is
actually your second call. Your third column is telephonic.
Yeah.
And you'll see, as I was talking about with the telephone, really what we're working on development, which is why it's starting a little bit later, is developing scripts that the person would hear the questions and prompts for them as they're on the phone. So that's what we would be bringing out to the recipients and providers and stakeholders to look at, is, do those questions make sense? Would they be understandable? How much time do we need in between each question? All of that kind of information would be what we would be getting feedback on, because we're not building like a telephone, like we have to build a prototype for a system.
Is it going to be done, how can I say this, with the same level of intensity, or is what I'm trying to ask, because frankly, I see it as being in some ways much more problematic. And I'm also wondering about what she said about the paper timesheets, in that with any kind of electronic system, you do sort of have the ability to capture like a screenshot or something that gives you something that you could eventually print out if you wanted to have some kind of something in your record that wasn't just, but I don't see how that's going to work in a telephone system, and I think that's going to be very problematic for a lot of people.
So actually, Connie, we've actually heard that important feedback from you guys and have been thinking about that along with the telephonic system. And there's a couple of options that someone who's choosing to use a telephone system that would then want some kind of a record. We are looking at, sort of at the end, there being another prompt where it says, if you would like to be mailed a copy of this, select and punch this number, or whatever it is telling you to do, and that then we could have something mailed for record keeping, is one potential option if the person doesn't want to use online at all. Whereas if someone just wants to approve by telephone but does utilize online systems, they could always go to the portal and just print something out from there, even if they chose to approve or do their timesheet via the telephone. So we're already starting to look at what the options are to ensure people have access to a way to keep record.
I would also encourage you to look at the possibility of having something like our already existing paper timesheets that could be like in a worksheet kind of format that they could fill out in a normal way that would allow them to interact with the telephone system and based on something that they've already got and that they could be filling out that would be in the same order or whatever, something like that makes the bridge a little easier for people.
And we certainly could look at tools for people, as far as, here's a document that you can record that then when you go to use the telephone, you can just punch this information in. That kind of support documents is something that we would definitely want to provide for folks.
We'll see that's why I think it's going to be, because this isn't something that's really been tried much. I think it's going to take a lot longer to develop and roll out than maybe the other system. And I'm sort of concerned that you're doing it later, but that was my point.
And we don't really mean to be doing it later, but it's going to take a little while to get a basic script scenario to bring to people. On the phone, do we have some folks that had questions?
Yes, several. Our first question comes from the line of Thomas Gregory with CIO in Berkeley. Please go ahead.
Hi, my question pertained to the timing of California seeking CMS's blessing or approval or permission for California's good approach. And what I mean by good approach essentially are California's proposed approach for satisfying the the place of service element, namely drop-down menu options that say home, community, and or home/community. The time of place, time of service element, which is clock in first time of the day, clock out last time of the day, but don't worry about in between. And the type of service element, satisfied with an option that just says, did IHSS work? I wanted to know when California intends to seek CMS's thumbs up for this approach. I'm guessing it would be after you seek a good faith 1-year extension, because I'm guessing that the more specific you are about what you're envisioning for the state, the less likely it might be to get that extension. I'm also guessing you would seek CMS's blessing before you started spending money on the potential vendors to develop prototypes and getting input and responding to that input in the fall and the spring on those prototypes. I would like to know when California intends to seek this approval, and reassurance that you'll let the community know when you seek it and when you get a response. The reason being that way Californian advocates would be in the loop and knowing that they might need to advocate with CMS should CMS not approve California's good approach. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is not currently an approval process that CMS is requiring for a state to be approved to do their approach. They're providing a lot of flexibility to states to develop their approach in conjunction with stakeholders to ensure that it is the least cumbersome possible. I will say that some of the guidance that CMS has provided, we believe is consistent with what we're doing. There was some questions from other folks around the whole concern with how do you have a start time and an end time for someone who does things periodically throughout the entire day. And there seemed to be a response back from CMS around the kind of approach that we're utilizing, where you have a start time and an end time from when you begin and when you end service. Let's see, you asked about location and you asked about type of service. CMS has been clear with us that type of service is a very high level, that PCSP or home health, as far as type of service, is an acceptable level for them. As far as location, they've been clear that utilizing GPS is not a requirement of EVV, and they haven't given any detailed level of where that needs to be complied with. We believe that our approach is compliant with the statute as it is written.
Okay, well, thank you. I not only like California's approach, but I am happy that you feel so confident that CMS will like it as well.
And I'm going to let Sarah Eberhardt-Rios add from DHCS's perspective as well.
Yeah, just wanted to provide some more information for the good faith extension request. So that's just an extension of our implementation deadline. So it would give us that additional years we've been talking about. And so to Debbie's comments, it'll be really just for CMS to consider allowing us to extend the dates by which EVV would need to be implemented in California. And we will, as a state, provide that letter request for their consideration prior to November 30th, 2018, but that's their deadline for states to reply. And CMS will have 30 days to consider states' requests, and then they'll get back to us with a decision. And then if they do not approve our request, they will allow us to have a conference call. We'll be able to provide some more information, and then we would submit it again. Although California is hopeful that we would have a successful first request.
And our next, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, operator, next call.
Okay. Our next question comes from Tammy Orr with Home Care Worker. Please go ahead.
Yes, I had two questions. First off, for people that are on WPCS and IHSS, and I should probably preface this by saying that I've been taking care of my brother for about 57 years now. He's 58 and uncontrolled seizures, non-self-directed. So he gets WPCS and IHS hours. Now, do we have to do those separately and say where we were for each and every one of those? I have to work 12 hours a day, so I have to say where I was all those times, and then separately to each agency. And then the other thing is, I realize for people like me, what you just said is that you give us an on time and an off time, but to be honest with you, it feels like you're making us lie, because I don't stop working after 12 hours. There's no sick leave for me or a time when I quit. I mean, I do seizures all night long. I sleep in 2-hour increments for well over 40 years now. And you're asking me to say that I quit, I stopped working at a certain time? Because that isn't true. So those are my two questions.
So actually, the whole intent of having a start and an end time being the first time in the day you provide a service and the last time you provide a service was specifically so that people wouldn't feel like they were not capturing things correctly. Perhaps.
Well, that isn't correct, dear.
Okay,
because
but if you started
I don't start
at
at any given time, and I don't stop at any given time. When he has a seizure and he needs to be aspirated, I get up and I do that.
So the first time that you do that, on whatever day it is, whether it's midnight to
After midnight? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, but I don't stop 12 hours later.
Okay, but you're only paid for 12 hours. Just like today, you're probably working more than 12 hours a day, but you still are only submitting 12 hours.
Oh, I can't even leave and go shopping. I can't do anything. My husband burned out giving care and killed himself 3 years ago. I'm on my own at 60 with a 58-year-old guy who's blind and can't do anything for himself. I don't stop 12 hours later, but you want me to say that I stopped. Also,
no,
I live in
I'm not saying
internet, and I don't have a cell phone.
Okay, I'm not
and
saying.
Sometimes, you know.
So I'm
how would
not
I be
saying
doing
that
that?
you're. I'm not saying that you're stopping. If you work 24 between midnight one day and midnight the next day, and you're still going to put the same number of hours that you worked as you do on your current timesheet.
Okay, then we need to not be calling it start and stop time, because it isn't that. It's the amount of hours you'll pay us for.
Your
right?
start time is the time.
No, there's no start time and there's no
Okay.
stop time.
I guess we're just going to have to leave it where it is. I believe that the way we've done it does allow for exactly what you're talking about. The start time is the time you provide the first service on whatever day it is, and the
So
end
the start time that you will pay me for.
No, I'm not saying that.
Because there's no
I am
starting
not
and
saying
stopping,
that.
honey. There's no starting and stopping.
Okay,
We need to call it something else.
but the day begins and ends, regardless of whether you continue working.
No, the time you
There
pay
still
me
is a
begins and
24
ends, but my day doesn't begin and end.
Okay.
Okay, we need to look at some semantics here.
Okay. I think you're not understanding what I'm communicating, and I don't know that you'll be able to.
Well, I know there are going to be a bunch of other people asking this too, because we're real employees now, not companions.
Okay. Okay.
And
Thank
so
you
what
for-
about my
thank you.
WPCS and IHSS question?
Just as you do
And I won't
today.
even go into this agency crap, but go ahead.
Just as you do today, there will be a separate timesheet for the different programs versus they just won't be paper. One will be, you can choose online or you can choose by telephone to submit them, but they are separate programs and you submit.
No, I mean, I can do it on paper, right? I don't have to call in and all that.
No, paper will not be an option when electronic visit verification.
Okay, what if I'm not
becomes
somewhere
required.
where I can get internet,
Then you can use
or
a
I'm not
LAN.
somewhere where there's phone coverage? Am I not allowed to go to those places?
So if you,
Because my brother has freedom of movement under the Lanterman Act.
yes, and you don't have to do it in immediate time. So if you, I assume sometime during the pay period, you'll be somewhere where there is either a landline, a cell phone, or
You don't have to
online.
call in daily.
No, you do not.
Well, I am concerned that this is going to violate my brother's rights to freedom of movement. So I don't understand why you need to know our location.
It's a requirement of the federal law where the service is provided is reported, and you'll be reporting it. We are not using GPS. We are not using any geolocation. We are simply having you report where the service was provided at a very high level of either home or community or both.
We don't have to do that daily, though. We can do it
No.
anytime we're calling our time in.
That's correct.
Okay. And it's all the same with WPCS, except you guys have stuck us with an agency now.
We're not sticking you with agency. WPCS would be provided in the same way it is today.
Well, we're getting an agency.
No.
Yes. Well, are you not up on this? I've just had 3 forms, and I think everyone can confirm this. WPCS is going to be handled through local agencies now. Do you not know that?
Hey, DHCS is here, and I'm going to let Sarah respond to that. I am not aware that individual
Oh, my
providers-
goodness. Okay, it's huge, dear. We're all going through it on WPCS. We've lost our workers, and now we're going into an agency. We've already received our forms. Are you like the head of this?
No, I'm not. I oversee
well,
IHSS. The person who oversees
that's kinda
WPCS
shameful.
is going to respond.
Okay, I'm waiting.
So this is Sarah, and we're talking about waiver agencies, I think, for the home and community-based waiver agencies.
Yes.
Yes. So I am happy to follow up with you on that specifically, if I could get your contact information and talk with you a little bit more about it. But certainly those waiver agency approaches, we would be talking about through a stakeholder process that would include lots more conversation. That's the stakeholder meeting we were talking about beginning to be scheduled in the end of September or in early October. So we do still need to have conversations about that and would welcome your input as well.
Okay, and so where do I leave that? Because I'm my brother's social worker for that program. I've had the same eligibility worker for well over 10 years now. And so now I have to go to a local agency, which I avoid agencies. I don't like to work through agencies. And I've been doing this, as I said, for well over 50 years with him. I think, and I've also been a vice president of a union. So I do know what I speak of. What is going to happen with that?
Right.
I mean, is there a way around the agency? Are they going to take part of my brother's hours? I mean, what is the deal with that? Because I became his social worker, so they didn't take his hours for a visiting nurse we didn't need.
And I'm happy to talk to you directly also. So can I just quickly get your name real quick, or you could email it to the stakeholder
No, my name is Tammy Orr. And am I on speaker right now?
You are. So I don't want you to have to give your contact information. So we can reach back out to you, Tammy.
All right. I appreciate if you would, because I still have a lot of questions. I'm long-term on this and taking care of my mother, too. I'm way pre-IHSS. I'm homeless in the park and hoping someone gives us something. Okay, that's where I come from as a child. This has happened to him when he was 4 years old. And I am concerned when changes come along, and I don't know what's going to happen next, since I'm the only one alive responsible anymore.
Well, I can understand that, and we'll follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy?
Thank you.
Hi,
Yes.
this is Carol Swartzlander. If you send that information to the stakeholder email address, it's EVV at DSS.
EVV, right?
At DSS.
Okay.
.ca. .gov.
Okay.
And I'll make sure Sarah gets your information.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from the line of Carol Loft with CARA. Please go ahead.
Hi, my last name is Moss, MOSS. My question is, in lieu of the wildfires that we are having right now, are you going to have a plan in your in this whole EVV for emergencies when people are displaced, but they still need their services?
So there's always circumstances where there's disaster that we make appropriate accommodations depending on what the circumstances are. If someone is displaced, again, it's not something that someone has to use on a daily basis. It would, if you were displaced, you should be able to continue to receive your services wherever you're displaced to, if your provider is with you. And you would be able to report that from any landline. It doesn't have to be your home landline or your home, any electronic device that you're using. But certainly we would be going on a case-by-case situation if there was an emergency or disaster situation.
I'm going back to the Napa fires last year, and the landline, all the telephone lines went down, which means you didn't have any internet or any phone services for a while. So that's why I'm asking, are you going to have something in place for this in case this happens again?
So if there was, but I don't think they were out for a 2-week period. And people weren't somewhere where they didn't have any connection for more than 2 weeks. If they did, we would have to make an appropriate accommodation for that. That is not something that we have fully had discussions about, but it's certainly something we can look at. But we always look at things on a case-by-case situation if there's any kind of natural disaster.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a question from the line of Joe Histenis with INST on Aging. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Joan. My question is regarding the boundaries of this EVV program. We already do EVV with some personal care services, and some of our services are privately funded, and some of them are through federal or Medi-Cal types of reimbursement. What is the scope? Are we expecting all personal care services to be under this scope regardless? And we currently do not use that electronic timekeeping. We use our own system. So just curious as to how you see that transition.
So are you an agency?
We're a nonprofit institute. We're subcontracting with a number of different entities around the state of California.
Okay.
They're nonprofit and other entities.
So
county government.
You're probably going to want to participate in the agency model stakeholder conversations where they'll be having these kinds of discussions. What the focus of this particular stakeholder meeting is about is individuals who are receiving their personal care services from individual providers, their self-directing care. So it's a little bit different circumstances, but please participate in the agency model discussions. The information about those stakeholder meetings will come out to our full distribution list, so you should be able to get that in that way.
Thank you.
I have a question from the line of Jeffrey Safrida with CDSS. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Jeff. I've usually done this on person. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because Tartagia and what comes out. But really, I believe you do need to make sure that you have a effective call-in center and that you probably have determined some way, whether you use Dun & Bradstreet or some other source of matter, of the verification of your address system. Discovered here, even in Sacramento, that is a recurring issue and problem. I hope you do a flow chart, lays out, explains to people more of your timeline and your flow system, how you expect to get things. You've mentioned it, you put a letter to that effect, but I'm hoping that there will be some diagram. I do not know whether, since I have just a small device to look at, whether it's effective on a mobile device to see. Most of the time your stuff is set for desktop and not for Android, but for iPhone capabilities. please make sure that your devices have that and you've explored that, and that your call center, you say grips, but your apps that you're going to use through there, I'm hoping that there is indeed a very verifiable system to determine for this purpose. Is that clear?
I'm not sure that I'm understanding the concern. So are you talking
Okay,
about?
my concern is many individuals in California use your Lifeline service as your connecting ability via telephone and or internet. And it's been clearly demonstrated, and so I'm hoping you're having a very effective with the advisory panel of the Public Utility Commission, who's apparently going to be coming here in some sense to Sacramento, that there is an effective portal tool at the end. I'm in a building that, as you can see, if I move around, this phone breaks up. And that connection is unreliable. I'm supposed to be 4G, and I'm less than a 2G service. And knowing that a number of systems are now dropping 3G dependable service, it suggests to me is this: where is your firm broadband width for your internet connection of the public utility Lifeline service?
Okay.
And I do not know how you have verified and effectively use that tool so that application will be indeed electronically verifiable.
Okay.
That's the comment, and I'm hoping, I think I've asked that question before, and I've heard no feedback on that application level.
I don't think that we're there yet.
I got it, but, please make sure that you have somebody verifying and doing that, because it's going to take you a while.
Okay.
Okay, our next question comes from the
operator, hold on for a second. One of the things that we want to make sure that the previous caller understands is we are not capturing location based on devices. We are not using GPS as a way to verify location of service. So yes, and we also are not using public utilities address for people using the telephone. We are having recipients and providers report the location of service through indicating it in the system.
Shall I go to the next question?
Okay. If someone in the room thinks he was talking about connectivity, if you're talking about connectivity, then we may need to use a landline or another device. Okay. 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 Okay, so that's something that we can look into. Okay.
Should I? So I think the last caller was talking about connectivity issues, and he was not talking about location, but I believe, from what I got, that he was talking about he foresees, and I kind of agree with him, that a lot of people and their attendants would call in via the Lifeline service, because those of us on fixed incomes generally would use Lifeline service because they have that service at home. So, but the problem is, I think from what he was talking about, is that sometimes due to where a person is located, and I know you're not talking about location, but he's talking about where a person is located, their Lifeline service may be somewhat sporadic and not reliable. I think what he was talking about was the fact that if that Lifeline services, if there's, because Lifeline services you can use a cell phone, but as a Lifeline, So, but the issue that I believe he was talking about is if he walks around particular areas of his home, then he gets 2G rather than 4G or whatever his cell phone provider has promised him, and therefore the line is could be unreliable. And I believe what he was talking about also was to have it mobile friendly, so the screen is readable. And he's concerned that if he's walking around his house and it's 2G as opposed to 4G, will that is it possible to have it securely submit in telephonic form, because that's the form he was talking about using, and therefore would it be reliable? So I believe what he was talking about is to talk to the Lifeline people and the Public Utilities Commission, which I thought he was asking an interesting concept and question in regards to developing the telephonic system, because a lot of people have Lifeline. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I got it now.
He wasn't talking
Thank you,
about
Marissa.
location.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Thank you for the interpretation, and it's something we'll have to look at.
Yeah, our next question comes from the line of Emily Castleman, In-Home Support Services. Please go ahead.
Sorry, my question was answered. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the room for a minute.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Let me see if anybody else has a question.
Hi there, it's Mark Hall from the Stop EVV Coalition. A lot of folks that use the electronic timesheet now really love it. It's very helpful, but and efficient and easy, but that's a select group, and admittedly a probably very, very small percentage of the people impacted by this. So it seems really important to consider, I think what you referred to earlier, Debbie, is the personal contact and the idea of going through social workers and really amping up that. It's very labor intensive, but it's how you're going to help people get on board, because the risk of people falling through the cracks is serious. And while, on the national discourse, there's a lot of concern about fraud, but there's never attention to people who fall between the cracks because of barriers that this risks imposing. So I, again, urge you to really think through the personal contact strategies, because and this isn't just through the rollout, this is going to be ongoing, because the turnover rate for workers is very high because it's a substandard employment wages. So there's a high turnover. So this process of teaching people is going to go on for a long time. And furthermore, the demographics of the country are such that this program hopefully will expand, because it's an alternative to institutionalization for an aging population as well as people with disabilities. And so it's going to be important to have it be as accessible as possible on all meanings of that term. So that was my comment. The question is a particular question for the Sarahs, both Sarahs, which is, who specifically at CMS are you dealing with? Is this at the regional or national office?
For the good faith extension, I believe this is at the national office.
And for the funding request, it's at the regional level.
And thank you for your comment. Totally agree that it's critical that we have really extensive outreach and support for folks, and that will be a part of our stakeholder discussions in the near future. Okay, on the phone, additional questions or comments?
Yes. We have from the line of Sheila Gunn Krishman, EW Stoppers. Please go ahead.
Hello. I think I'm going to direct most of my comments to telephonic time system, because I am having a problem, and it's happened in the last 2 timesheets where the telephonic time system is supposed to call me, and it says that it has called me. Like when I go through the service process of finding out what has gone on, the logs say that it made a call, but I never received one. I do not have a landline, and so, Debbie, I did not appreciate the comment that, well, just use a landline then. Most people don't have landlines these days. Well, I don't know. A lot of people don't. And I have a cell phone only, but in my house, which is an apartment that is weird and cell phone service isn't that great in here, I have to use the Wi-Fi calling feature to have reliable communications. So if the Wi-Fi goes down, I'm out. And so I would like to echo Jeffrey's comments. I would like to echo Connie's comments. I'm glad for what Marissa and Marg said, sorry. And, but one of the things that I would like to see, and I'm glad that you're starting to say that we are, for different providers, you can have different methods of dealing with the timesheets, but I'm very literate in technology, but my worker is not. And therefore, I am forced to deal with the telephonic time system, and I hate it. I guess it's better than nothing, but it's not reliable. And I've made reports to a supervisor named Kevin, I believe, and I've given them a lot of notes. I was a part of the settlement that put the telephonic timesheet in place. And way back, even before the pilot, I was telling them about problems, and those problems still remain. And so I'm deeply concerned. The scuttlebutt is that you are talking with new telephone timesheet vendors. I say huzzah, but I want to be in on the ground floor of making sure that they do things. For example, the current telephonic timesheet system does not handle speakerphones well at all. Many people with disabilities do not handle little buttons or touch screens with their fingers, and or, such as in my case, it takes me a minute to actually get the keypad to appear on the screen so I can use the damn thing. And so a timesheet system that makes me push a button to say English when all other input can be given by voice is ridiculous. But their excuse was they wanted to make sure we weren't bots. No, I am not from Russia. So I've given a lot more detail into the system from other places than this venue, but I wanted to raise this all to this process's consciousness, and also add, and last thing, that the settlement is now considered over. The telephone timesheet system is not working properly, in my opinion, and I am deeply concerned about using social workers because I haven't seen mine in over a year, and getting a hold of them is very difficult. In Alameda County and in Sacramento County, they are overworked, underpaid. God bless them, they do their best. And it's not their fault, but it's not enough. And I just want to point out that what Tammy Orr was talking about is IHSS only pays for X amount of hours per month. IHSS pays just barely minimum wage. These people, some of whom work 24 hours a day. So yes, Tammy, you would say 12 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. of said day in order to get all your stuff in. And I do understand what you were saying. We have to fix some other problems with IHSS as a system legislatively in order for EVV not to cut off our legs or arms or mouths or something. And that needs to be taken seriously. And you need to hear the stress and fear that this is causing for people, because even now at the fourth stakeholder meeting, Tammy's been here before, and she's heard much of what you've said, but she's still very concerned. And so these things are not being met and addressed properly. We're not done yet, and this is not smooth, calm waters. I see choppy ways ahead.
And certainly it's not anywhere near done. We're still in the very beginning of this. I appreciate your comments. And if we can certainly repeat the address Carol had given Tammy, but if you would send any information that you have or your contact information, we can have someone call you about the issues you're experiencing with the telephonic timesheet system currently to ensure that those get addressed, because we want to make sure it's working currently, and then also have the right people be participating in the creation of the expanded telephonic system for EVV. Do you want me?
Just so you know, I've already made all this notation to that department, and I would ask you to do your homework with them, number one. And number two, a timesheet has happened since that conversation where the timesheet system didn't call me and may or may not have said it did. I haven't checked. So this is a current right now problem. It is also an intermittent problem, so it's not, I can't reproduce it, it will. But I do know, for example, that if somebody has a double digit in their RAN, like 2 6s or 2 5s, the timesheet system has a problem with that. But that was not in the literature for the timesheet system, so I picked a RAN, and in order to change it, I have to go through the county, which is impossible to get a hold of. So here we are. I'm in this horrible feedback nightmare loop.
And I appreciate that you've submitted stuff prior, and I can certainly look into that. But if you send your contact information, we can have someone talk to you directly about your specific concerns and also look at how those could impact the EVV development.
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
I have before, and I'll do it again.
Our next question comes from Belinda Stradley with Stop EVV. Please go ahead.
Yes, I am feeling a little confused. The first announcement of this stakeholder meeting said that the topic was going to be consumer-directed services. And if I misunderstood that, I just want to make some comments.
It's
on consumer-directed services.
So it's EVV for the consumer or self-directed type of services versus agency services, but it's all related to electronic visit verification.
Okay, thank you. That confirms that it was going to be about consumer-directed services versus agency services. I got to tell you, we're almost getting done here, and I have not heard that. If it was couched in different context, it didn't get to me, and instead I'm feeling quite alarmed that what we've heard about during this time is agency model, and that is a red flag for many of us.
The only thing that we've talked about with agency is to let people know that there'll be upcoming stakeholder meetings and respond to specific questions that people brought up.
Hey, I want to say that I really hoped that we would hear about consumer-directed services in California, and I'm just going to complete my thought, if I may.
Sure.
That I want to know, is California, CDSS, committed to consumer-directed services, and what does that mean in California? And I listened to an applied self-direction presentation recently, which is contracted by CMS. It said that EVV was built for agencies and not for individual consumers and providers. And the most recent CMS guidelines ignored the individual provider model, and it's all geared for industry and vendors and agencies. and not for the nonprofit individual consumer and our providers, which is, as we all know, the main model in California. Most of us, in an earlier stakeholder meeting, CDSS did tell us that that's the majority of IHSS recipients in the state, in the country model, and they're all, 50%, and that's us, that's California. So I really want to hear what California has to say, what CDSS has to say about protecting the consumer-directed services model, the individual provider model in California, and what you see that as being, what constitutes that, and not assume that everyone is on the same page or even knows what that is. This model that came out of the disability community way back when, at the urging of the disability community and the independent living movement beginnings, is at the heart of the independent living movement, that there's a direct relationship between the employer with the disability and the individual workers who work together, and not a one-size-fit-all agency model or medical model or patient model, which is the hallmark of agencies. And how is this model, assuming California is still on the same page with the disability community and the independent living movement in California, how do you think the California model is going to fare in a national environment which doesn't want us? States are telling their people, that their recipients, that they are planning to phase out individual providers in favor of agencies and medical models, which sees us as patients. And so, I want to hear, is California committed to this model, and what does it mean, and how are you going to protect it, and how do you think it's going to fit in and survive in what is now the national trend? And that's my question.
So California is committed to the consumer-directed model. We have the vast majority of our personal care services are delivered through that model. We don't intend to make any changes to that. We are just looking at how to meet the requirement of EVV within that model. We're not looking at changing that model or doing anything different. We have a huge value for consumer directed and the way that we're doing services in California. That's what, the focus of all of our initial stakeholder work around EVV has been focused on the consumer-directed model, because that is the primary model for personal care services. That's why agency model is not even starting discussions until September, October, because we have been made our primary focus the consumer-directed model, and are working with all of you to find the least cumbersome way to make it work with EVV. I'll ask Sarah if she has anything to add to that from DHCS's perspective.
Hi, this is Sarah from DHCS. I would just support what Debbie has shared with you, and that we've spent the majority of today's meeting really discussing the self-directed model, and we are very much looking forward to having a good conversation beginning in September, October as well.
Sarah, I have to interrupt because I've been sitting here the whole time waiting to hear about the consumer-directed model, because that was the topic for today. And I think the things that you just said, Debbie, that's great. It could have been said at the top instead of starting to talk about agencies, which even the mention of it makes my stomach, tie in a knot, because I don't want California to go that way ever. And I don't think most people know what consumer-directed is, and it has many forms and ideas about it in different areas. But it wouldn't have hurt to just go over that so that we're all on the same page. And again, given that EVV was not created with consumer direction in mind, and rather is barreling toward the agency model and medical models, and states, doing away with individual providers and so on, I wonder to myself, and people wonder, and I heard it said, is there going to be permission or approval from CMS for the California approach? Because the California approach, God bless us, thank goodness, I am so glad and proud of this state, but we're only one of 50, even though, we have half of the people. But how is California going to fare in this environment moving forward? That the latest CMS guidance ignored this model. It's been so obvious that industry is so powerful in the EVV moving forward, and here we are, consumer, grassroots, individual people trying to keep alive the independent living philosophy. And I guess that just, if I had heard some of these realities addressed today, or perhaps they'll be addressed another time soon, I would feel better about that.
So I think we did have a conversation earlier about CMS and approving or not approving California's model, and that basically there is no approval process for the approach by CMS. That CMS is allowing states to do their implementation.
How does California see itself protecting and moving forward in this environment with massive industry push for agency and medical models? Give me some perspective if you can. I would appreciate it.
I think you're talking to the wrong folks about that. Really, that is a legislative conversation, probably your federal legislature. This isn't the venue to talk about. But no,
what is your perspective?
But what we're doing is we're implementing the statute and the law that we're required to implement. We're not the ones who make the law or determine what the law is going to be. And if those are concerns that you have, then you really should be discussing that with your representatives, your federal legislators.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from the line of Paula Herman, provider. Please go ahead.
Hi. I have several questions, and first I want to say hi, Marty. Second of all, in regard to Tammy's questions and her fears, I heard at the beginning of the call that we were going to have to check in and check out. Then I heard later on that no, you don't have to do it every day. On a different call, I was under the assumption that it was going to be the same as now, but add a couple of little boxes. I take care of my daughter 24/7. If I'm up in the middle of the night or whenever I'm up, and believe me, I filled out a 24-hour plan that states that I wake up and she's watched by the provider, lunch being watched, from 5 to 10, 10 to, 7 a.m. I'm on standby in case she wakes up. This is 24/7 what I'm doing. So Tammy's fear is saying, okay, so I'm checking out, and we don't check out, and it's a lie to say that we check out, and so could we just do this? I fill out a timesheet, and my daughter's on the max, 283, and so I put in the 9 or 10 hours every day on that timesheet, and then I have to connect that with this electronic thing or the phone thing or whatever besides the paper sheet that I'm still doing. So I'm doing a timesheet just so I have my hours straight.
You're asking multiple
regardless
questions. Can we do
of
them one at
checking
a
in and
time?
out, that I only work 9 or 10 hours a day, and that's a lie, but according to the 24-hour plan, but according to the cap on hours, that's how I'm paid for. So it's confusing, and if Tammy is confused, and if I'm confused, and I've been in this rodeo since 1974 with my daughter, I can't even imagine the confusion that's going to go on. So I think simplicity has really got to be first most present in your mind. Are we going to have to call in every morning and call out when we're supposedly checking out? Or are we going to fill out a timesheet like we do now? We check in and we check out and check off the box, and it's home and community based. So you have to put home and community based, not home or, and then call it a done deal. And as far as our location goes, it's home or the community. Or is it going to be really complicated, and people who don't speak English, and people who don't understand the system anyway, and people coming in as a provider for 6 months and hate it and end up don't want the job, and then you've got parent providers that feel like we're being trapped. I mean, first this EVV thing, thank God, I don't have to wear some ankle bracelet, but it's not clear. So are we going to check in and out every day and give our location every single day? And then you said something about telephonic, and it's going to give prompts and a script, and I don't have time for scripts. I'm barely sitting here able to talk between helping my daughter right now. So I don't have time to all of a sudden tell her, hold the set, girlfriend, because I got to go check out. And I'm really not checking out. And that's Tammy's thing, is that we're lying. We're not checking out. So then if you say, okay, you check in at 11:59 and you check out at 11:58 and check back in, and then you're way over the amount of 283, because then you're at 720. And you're not going to pay, and then they're scratching their head going, how can they say that they're there 24/7, but we're not paying them 24/7, and yet protective supervision is 24/7, and so is the 24-hour plan. So you've got to make this simple, and you've got to make it clear. So that's my comment on this whole process and this agency model. And one other thing, I read early on all these different vendors and the questions and answers, and the one that you're currently using, which is HP, but they changed their name, stated that this could be done every 2 weeks. It depends on you, the state, and how you want to do it. So I was under the impression that if they were going to take it over, that yes, it would be the same. Electronic, paper, forget the phone, electronic or paper, every 2 weeks, check off the boxes, and it's basically the same. Does that satisfy the feds? Or are we supposed to wake up in the morning, roll out of bed, and say, okay, I'm alive, I'm here, and then check out at the designated time 9 or 10 hours later, because we're really not going to leave. That's where the frustration lies with Tammy, and it breaks my heart to hear her crying. So another thing, SSI is $912 a month. What about the folks that can't afford the internet? What about the folks that don't have a landline? Are you going to provide them with an internet service with a computer and an internet service? Is that going to come out of the money, that Sandata is going to gobble up? The other thing is, they can use Lifeline if it even works. They live out in the boonies. They don't even have access to internet or the phone. And how do they pay their rent when, and I don't want to go on the SSI tangent, but I certainly could, because in 2011, they stopped giving COLAs, and we should be up on SSI. It should be about $1,700 and something a month. It should not be $912. They have in 2011, it was $907. Right now, it's $912. $5 in 11 years. That's been the increase for SSI. And then you have people standing in line, begging and pleading legislators, 100 for 100, and that's crazy because it's not 100. And then you've got another group wanting food stamps or wanting HUD, and I don't want any of it. I just want to take care of my daughter, you know, and I don't want you complicating my life. It's already complicated. My daughter is high risk, 24/7 care, and to add all this weight on us constantly, I mean, you guys are burning us out. You're the reason why we're going to all get burnt out. And I don't walk away from my daughter, but somebody that's not related is going to walk right out that door. So when you're being kind and thoughtful, you need to make it simple. And you need to explain today, because at the beginning of the call, you stated checking in and checking out. And we took that just like every day, check in, check out. And then a couple of your location. Who cares where we are? What does it matter? But the feds care. Okay, they want to know where we are. Okay, well, I'm on Maui, basking in the sun, okay? On my daughter's $912 a month and my little IHSS check, okay? I mean, you need to explain this. Or is it going to be a timesheet that's every 2 weeks that we can do electronically, and there's no reason why it can't be paper for people that are comfortable with paper, like me, and just check off a couple of boxes. Home and community-based services, that's what we provided, fulfilled everything on your NOAA that you're shifting all around with 82 pages, and you're cutting hours that you promised you wouldn't. I mean, I have a lot to say. So first of all, can we please get this clear? Do we have to check in every day, every morning and every night and lie? Or do we just check in and out every 2 weeks like normal? And then what's the issue with paper timesheets?
Okay. So what I said at the beginning of the call was a start time and an end time, not that you would be checking in and checking out. I didn't go over this in detail because that was our previous stakeholder meetings. All of that information is posted on our website, and I'm happy to go over it again if people are confused. We are not asking people to check in and check out on any kind of a real-time basis. At the same time that you would normally be completing a timesheet today, and you can do that however you do it today. You can do it every day, you can do it every other day, you can do it once a week.
I fill out a timesheet every 2 weeks because my daughter's advanced payment used to be once a month.
And that's fine, and that's your choice. Other people do it differently. All I'm saying is that when you go in to complete your timesheet as you do today, which can be every 2 weeks if you choose, you will be adding some additional information to the number of hours you work per day. You'll be adding the time you started and the time you end, and you will be indicating if the service was provided in the home, in the community.
24-hour care, you don't start and end.
Can I just
you're
finish?
Up half the night, and you're up during the day, and my daughter's yelling. I just want a clear picture of, is it every day that we have to check in and out, or is this going to be just like a timesheet? And if it's just like a timesheet, then keep the paper and forget about the phone, because it doesn't sound like that's working very well.
Okay.
A lot of people don't have the internet.
So you have the choice of how frequently you want to work on your timesheet. You can do it at the end of the pay period if that's what you choose and what works for you. When you go in, you will enter the hours you worked for the day, the time you started, the time you ended, and
why do we have to do that? Why can't I just put 9, 9, 10, 10, 9, 9? Why do you have to? Why do you want to know 8 a.m. to something else when that's not accurate? That's a lie.
Okay, because that is a requirement under federal law.
Well, their requirement is asking me to lie.
Okay.
Because I don't work like that. People that are 24/7 don't work like that, and that's Tammy's frustration, and that's my frustration, and that's the majority of us that do 24-hour care's frustration. You don't understand up and down all night, and if I put down, I got up at 2 a.m. and then I got back to bed at 5, and then I got back up at 7. You want me to fill all that out every day?
No, I don't.
And just walk around?
No.
How silly! Walk around and log every single move I make.
Okay, that's
Well,
not.
I'm trying to take care of my daughter.
That's not what we're asking. If on Tuesday you started at 2 a.m. in the morning was the first time you got up with your daughter, and you worked until 11:30 that night, then the start time would be 2 a.m. and the end time would be 11:30 at night, and you did however many hours you did total that you claimed for that day.
And then how does that work on the capped hours of 283?
You still are going to claim the number of hours per day the same way you do now. So if you're claiming 9 hours a day or 9.5 hours a day.
Okay, so you want us to check in and out every time we're up and down, right?
No, I don't want you. You're not going to need to check in and out. You're going to put a start time is the first service you provided of the day, and the end time is the last service you provided for the day. The total number of hours
it's never the same. I have a daughter that's incontinent. I have a daughter who has a lot of bathroom issues. I have a daughter who is DD. I have a lot of issues going on here, and you expect me to stop and write it all down and keep track of when I'm up at 2 and when I'm up at 4 and when I forgot. I in a blue moon I sleep until 8. I never do that.
You're not listening to the response. You're not
because they're not making it simple.
You do not have to check in and out on that day. You do not have to check in and out with every service. You do not have to do any of that. At the end of the pay period, when you complete your timesheet, you're going to put a start time for the day and an end time for the day. The very first service, the time you started, and the very last service. Not I started at 1 and I stopped at 2 and I started at 3 and I started at 4. That is not the way you need to do it.
Okay, my dear, then we follow the 24-hour plan, correct? Because I've got down here that I wake up at 7, and from 7 to 12, she's watched by the provider. From 12 to 5, she's having lunch and being watched by me. From 5 to 10, she's being watched by me. From 10 to 7 a.m., I'm on standby in case she wakes up. So you want me to do all that, right?
No.
So I'm 24/7.
No.
So every single day is 24 hours.
That's not
what
I
I'm on standby when I'm not hopping around.
That is not how you need to do it.
Well, then you're going to throw away the 24-hour plan, right? Because that's going to be null and void.
The purpose of the 24-hour plan is for the social worker at the time of assessment to have a conversation with you and ensure that your individual that you're caring for who needs 24-hour-a-day care, that there is a plan to meet that need. That is not what we're talking about with EVV. With EVV, what we're talking about is I provided services between what time and what time. I provided services between...
If I provide services between 2 and 5, and then I go back to bed till 7, then I clock out, I clock back in again?
Stop. You need to stop and listen. The first time you provided service, so I woke up at 2 in the morning on this day. That was the first service of this day I provided, and I provided service all the way to 11 o'clock at night. That was the last service. So on the timesheet, I would write 2 a.m. to 11 p.m. I provided services between those hours, and the total amount of time I'm claiming for the day is going to be your normal hours that you put on a timesheet today, the way you do it today.
That doesn't add up. That doesn't match.
Of course
so
it doesn't add up.
Off the hours.
It is not going to add up.
Which way is going to be the honest way? I woke up at 2 and I went to bed at 11 and got back up at 2? Or is it going to be I only worked 10 hours?
We are not asking for those two things to add up. We're asking
Oh, you don't want it to add up?
No, we don't need it to add up. We're asking for the period of time because I could have worked from 9 in the morning to 9 at night and provided services periodically throughout that day throughout that time for a total of however many hours. So
I think you need to get rid of the cap on hours if you want this to all be in sync. It needs to be in sync. You can't tell me that I can sit there and say that I was up, at 2 o'clock in the morning and I went to bed at midnight, and yet I'm only claiming 10 of those hours. So take the cap off the hours and raise it 720. There. Then you're being honest. Otherwise, you've got two different things going on. That's going to confuse people greatly.
And you have two different things going on. You have
accurate, and then your capped hour idea.
Okay. Well,
right. So the accurate reflection of what you're actually doing, and then what you'll pay for out of that accurate reflection, right?
A part of how we are trying to address the cumbersomeness of this, and so people don't check in and check out many, many times a day, and don't have to check in or check out in real time at all. Okay, you don't have to do that at all. Is that
but I'm supposed to sit and keep track every single day of what time I woke up and what time I went to bed, right? Why do you care what time I woke up and went to bed? I'm here.
I don't care about that. I care about
that's what you're telling us to put down.
I am trying to meet the new law requirement that the feds have given to us in order to get all of the federal funding that we get for this program.
Okay,
and we're
so
trying to do that
accurate and honest.
In a way that
it's more important for you to get the funding than for us to be honest. Because if I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I go to bed at midnight and it wasn't me, the mom, would you pay somebody else to live here and do that? And the answer is no.
So what I'm going to say is it's now.
The hours at 283.
This is the end of our time frame, and
well,
this
that's
information
fine,
is on the website.
It's complicated when you want us to do two different things. One is accurate and one is a lie. Okay, and that's where we're standing.
Okay.
I mean, it's one or the other. You can't say, oh, you just do it this way for the feds and that way for the state.
So
that's not accurate across the board, lady. It's just not. And thank you for your time, but it makes no sense.
Okay. I appreciate your comments.
None. You're going to have to make it simpler. Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay, operator, I think we've come to the end of our call. If you want to let the folks on the phone know, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude your conference for today, and thank you for your participation and for using AT&T teleconference services. You may now disconnect.
Operator, are you still on the line?
Yes, one moment. I'll place you back in the host room.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask how many calls we have.
Thank you, Kim.
Ms. Rutledge, you are back in the host room.